Well, welcome everyone to our latest edition of Stories for Healing. We've been going since the end of October, and thankfully or regrettably, there seems to be no end in sight. Thankfully, because we have so many storytellers and so many stories to be told, and regrettably, because there's still such a need for them. But we'll do what storytellers do, and we'll keep lifting everything that we can with the story. Today, I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Steve Daut to us to tell a story for us. Steve, please tell us a story.
Thank you, Jim. When I was 7 years old, my parents got divorced and we moved to a new town. Now, this school system in the new town was advanced from the old town, and so the teacher had to help me do it and do a lot of remedial work with me. And I think she resented that a bit because she was very mean to me. One day, I was sitting in class and I had to go to the bathroom. I raised my hand, but she didn't acknowledge me. And this went on for quite some time, and I started getting fairly frantic. And so I was kind of waving both hands and bouncing up and down. And at one point, she looked right at me, shook her head no, and went back to teaching the class. Well, I couldn't hold it. I let go. And it was horribly embarrassing, but I thought, well, as a third grader, here I am. The bell's about to ring, and maybe 10 minutes from now, the bell will ring. And maybe if I put my head down on the desk, the kids won't notice as they leave. They'll think I'm asleep. But the girl in the desk next to me noticed, raised her hand. The teacher acknowledged her immediately. And she said, "Steve Daut peed his pants." So I looked at the teacher and she looked back at me and said, "Well, I guess you might as well just go home then." So I had to get up in front of the whole class and I, humiliated, dripped my way home. And that night I made myself sick with worry about all the things that were going to happen the next day. The kids were going to tease me. It was going to be too painful. So the next morning when I woke up, I told Mom that I was in too much pain to go to work. I was sick. Well, she was having none of it. She said, "Well, you have to deal with this." I was unrelenting. I just couldn't get myself to go. I was in too much pain. That's what I told myself. My mom ultimately just took me next door to Grandma and Grandpa's house, said, "You deal with this kid. I got to go to work." Grandma started lecturing me right away. But Grandpa said, I'll take care of this." Now, my grandpa was an old German with a ready smile and an easy sense of humor, kind of a quirky sense of humor. For instance, one day on my birthday, he gave me this big box that was all wrapped up in birthday paper. I opened that up, and inside of that was another box also wrapped up in birthday paper, and another, and another, and another. 5 boxes in all, and inside the innermost box, a red onion. That was my birthday present. That's the kind of thing Grandpa did. But he would also teach me things, and when he did, he would wink. He'd say, "See, Stu?" And for years, I thought that he had a pet name for me. I thought he was calling me Stu. But it turns out in German, "Siehst du" means, "Do you see?" So I had the right message, but the wrong language. Well, so he bailed me out this day. He said, "Come on, we're going downstairs." We went downstairs, and he said, "We're going to make sauerkraut." Well, the way Grandpa made sauerkraut, he had this kraut cutter about 3 feet long, about this wide, and on the bottom there, it had 3 diagonal blades, and there were rails along the thing, and there was a open wooden box that sat on those rails and would slide back and forth. So you'd put the cabbage in that box, slide it back and forth, and it would slice that cabbage to fine ribbons. Then you take a 5-gallon crock, you put some cabbage in there, layer of salt, cabbage, all the way up. And then you take this thing that looked like a butter churn. We called it a crouch stomper. And you just pound that down and bruise that cabbage, and the salt will cause it to give up its water. After you did all that, then you take a layer of cheesecloth, put it on top, and then some rocks to weight it down so that cabbage was submerged under this briny, salty cabbage water. That was step number 1. Step number 2 was you leave it set. After about a week, the whole basement smells like something had died in there. And that was when it started working. So then you wait for another 2 or 3 weeks until it smells like whatever died had resurrected and died again. And that's when you knew it was done. So you put on a gas mask, you go down there, you take this stuff off the top, and there's a layer about that thick of rotten, stinking, green, nasty cabbage. And you pull that off the top, and underneath is the most incredible, sweetest smelling cabbage that you could ever imagine. Well, we had done step number 1 that day. It took us all day long. And we went upstairs. We'd been standing on that concrete floor all day long working that cabbage. And Grandpa was walking really slow. Now, he always walked with a crutch, but I never really thought about it that much. But this time he was leaning on that crutch so hard, I thought he was going to break it. He went to his easy chair, sat down, asked me to get his kit from the bathroom. When I came back with that kit, he had rolled up his pant leg. I had never seen this leg before. It was bent. Right in the middle of the shin bone, it was bent and kind of twisted in. And right there where it was bent, the skin was stretched so tight, it was bright red. It looked like it was going to split wide open. Well, he took some liniment from that kit and rubbed it on there. He took a handful of aspirin, and I asked him what had happened. And he said, from the time I was your age, about 8 years old, he had broken his leg when he was 8, but his family was new immigrants. They hadn't built up a network. They didn't know how to access the healthcare system. And so they set that leg the best they could, but they never set it right. And over the next couple of years, he broke that leg 6 more times. So I realized from the time he was my age, he would probably have been teased and humiliated by the kids. He had probably sat and watched them out playing, knowing he couldn't do that. And now he's in his 60s, and every day, from the time he was 8 years old, every day he had experienced moments of excruciating pain. But he never let it define who he was. Well, after that aspirin kicked in, he told me this poem. When I was young and had no sense, I bumped my head against the fence. The fence was rough and I was tough, and you bet your life I'd had enough. And he winked. He said, "See, Stu?" And he went to sleep. Today, and ever since then, when I have something that happens in my life and I feel like I can't go on or there's too much pain to deal with it, I think about Grandpa and a sauerkraut, and I envision that pain is just a little bit of skim on the top that I can take off, and I don't have to deal with it after that. I can find that sweet life underneath. Thank you.
Because I really love the story. I was pleasantly surprised at the ending with the layer. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful metaphor. Um, I think, without that layer, there wouldn't be the sweet sauerkraut underneath it, obviously. Um, and yet, how much work that can be sometimes uh, to go in and peel that layer off, peel that layer away. Uh, so, can you? I'm trying to think of what to ask you. I just love it.
Well, I've gone back and forth about tagging it, like that,
Yeah,
to say, well, does it stand on its own? But then that metaphor, it's one of those things where you think, well, it really is a beautiful metaphor,
yeah, yeah,
and um, and it works. I mean,
yeah.
it's one of those sort of creative visualization things where you can kind of step out of where you are in
Yeah.
that space and say, here's a way to think about it, you know.
And I know what was trying to come clear for me.
Mhm.
Um, it's not that the pain, that nasty layer, it's not that it creates the good stuff beneath. Um, it's not saying we only get pain so we get the good, but we're saying, if I may, both are a natural product of living our lives, and we have to be willing to let the pain go if we can. And it's not always easy to do. It's not automatic. You might need to wear a gas mask to go down and do that work. But it's not like it it it's just one more part of the process that can bring us joy and can bring us pain, depending upon what we're willing to dig for.
Yeah, yes, it's very much a natural process. It's paired in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
With sauerkraut, you can't have one without the other.
No, no.
That's what life is,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so you have to embrace all of it,
yeah.
and you can enjoy one of them and handle the other.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thanks again, Steve. So, folks, another episode of Stories for Healing. So glad you could make it. And if you've got an extra gas mask, you might think about making some of your own sauerkraut. But no, seriously, to be able to see that we live a life that's complex and that there are definitely periods of sorrow and pain and difficulty. And sometimes they do feel too much to bear. I think part of the story that's unspoken but worth repeating is that Steve and his grandfather worked on that together. And it's a much easier job when we do that. So
It's true.
share these stories either electronically. So share the YouTube version or the Facebook version. Talk to each other, share with each other, and hold your nose through some of the foul stuff and make your way to the good stuff because it can be there for us, especially when we work together. Thanks again.